Hello and welcome back to my channel and to my Trying to Like series. This is where I look at a film or a work of art or a piece of popular culture and I'm not quite sure how I feel about it. Now today I want to talk about The Zone of Interest by Jonathan Glazer. Now long-term subscribers to this channel will know that this is a video I've been promising for many months. I was originally going to do it in February and March when the film came out in the UK, but I kind of lost my bottle really because it's quite a difficult film to talk about, quite a difficult subject matter to talk about, but I've finally decided to get round to it. The reason I wanted to talk about this movie in the first place is I don't watch many modern films now, and when I do, I often find them a bit disappointing. This is one film that I found a really interesting experience. What I mean by that is the whole totality of watching the film. It wasn't just that it was well made, it wasn't just that it was well crafted. It challenged me, and it made me think about stuff, and it was interesting. And overall, I thought it was the most interesting experience I'd had with a modern film for many years, and so I'm very grateful to Jonathan Glazer for that. I was also extremely impressed by the filmmaking, the craftsmanship. If you're interested in cinema as an art form, I strongly recommend you check this film out. It's clearly made by a director who's thoughtful, intelligent, and has original ideas about the medium. The film is loosely based on a novel by Martin Amis, which I have not read, okay? And that novel is itself loosely based on Rudolf Höss. Now, Rudolf Höss was the commandant of the Auschwitz concentration camp, and he lived outside this concentration camp in a house with his family all the way through the years of the Holocaust. And what Jonathan Glazer has done is he's taken the camera outside the concentration camp. We never go inside, we never see the horrors of what was happening within, and purely concentrates on the bourgeois life of Höss and his family, watching them go through their daily routines, having parties together, talking to neighbours, talking to fellow officers, etc., etc. And eventually they're moved on. So that's the sort of, it's really a series of tableau vivant, where, in a rather avant-garde manner, Glazer pulls back and we just watch, as of a distance, like looking into a fishbowl, this family go about their business. It's beautifully crafted, beautifully filmed, and for a film that's so abstract and cold, it's very well paced and very involving. And I really admire Glazer for achieving that. It's a very difficult thing to do, actually. That's all very well. But what about the film ethically and morally? Therein lies the rub. Now, before we go any further, I should admit that I'm one of those people who is a bit squeamish about films about the Holocaust in general. Many people feel that it's too horrible, too great a subject to be really captured on film, and that any attempt to capture it will sort of diminish it or trivialise it. And I kind of feel that way. There's been many very good films in cinematic terms made about the Holocaust, but they always seem to fall short, really, of getting to the real truth of the Holocaust, the real pain and horror of it. There's another problem, isn't there? And that is how to represent the Nazis themselves. Now, if you're British, ever since the Second World War, for years and years, the Nazis were always represented as evil madmen, strutting around in uniforms going, "Heil Hitler," all this sort of stuff. Like they were kind of cartoon characters. But then, the philosopher Hannah Arendt came up with a phrase. And that phrase has become a huge cliche in the way we think about the Nazis. And that phrase was the banality of evil. A brilliant way of putting it, but unfortunately it's a much abused phrase. What she meant was, look, it's no good thinking about these people as evil monsters or cartoon bogeymen. Essentially what happened here was a country full of ordinary people like you and me basically fell into creating a system which processed people through death camps and killed them in their millions. They were lawyers and farmers, shopkeepers, there were, people who built these camps. There were architects, there were builders, there were civil servants. The banality of evil. Now, this phrase has become much abused, I think. So, to the point where you go to the opposite extreme. Instead of them being evil monsters and cartoon figures, they become so ordinary that it's almost like, it's almost glib, you know. Like, well, there's just an ordinary person and they just happen to be a Nazi. That's the line that Glazer, I think, has taken to an extreme in this film. So we never see inside the camp, and we see this bourgeois family having tea, chatting, looking round the garden, even though they can see the death camp in the distance. The banality of evil. And that's where I start to have a problem with Glazer's film, right? Because that's not true, right? If a man has got to be a commandant of a death camp, a major figure in the army, whether we like it or not, that person has got to be intelligent, resourceful, ambitious, clever. He has got to be someone who can express his point of view. He is not just a pen-pushing, middle-class clerk. That's not real. It is not real to assume that someone of that eminence within the German army would not talk about it with his wife, would not have an opinion about it, or that his wife could blind herself to it. She'd be part of it. The banality of evil has become a sort of trap in itself, just like those British movies that refuse to show the Germans as anything but strutting maniacs. We've now gone in the other direction. We're now so invested in treating the Nazis as ordinary people that we're not seeing the real truth of it, that this was a political structure, a complex political structure that was run by complex people. Some of them very intelligent people, very smart people, very resourceful people. This is the reality that we still are unable to face, right? Now, I'd like to go off on a bit of a tangent here. And I'd like to discuss a film that came out around 2015-2016. It was called Son of Saul, and it was directed by a Hungarian director called Laszlo Nemes. Now, this film takes a completely different approach to the Holocaust. Instead of holding back, right, it throws you right in. And it goes right into the camps. Glazer stays outside. This one goes right in, right up to the gas chambers themselves, in the very opening sequences. And it's about a Sonderkommando. The Sonderkommandos were Jewish prisoners who were recruited to help and assist in the functioning of the death camps. So it's a difficult subject, right? And Laszlo Nemes takes a very different aesthetic approach to Glazer. He throws you in. The camera is always active. You're always right in the middle of business. Sometimes you can only hear what's going on around you. You can't actually see. You're so tied to the main character. So the camera is going in and out of situations, and there's lots of business and movement, and you're sort of in the madness of it all. I don't think any other film I've ever seen so impressed me with the physical, horrible reality of the Holocaust. And I admired it for that reason. But I admired it for two other reasons. I admired it because what it showed is the real horror of the Holocaust. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want to diminish the physical horror of it, right? But the real horror of the Holocaust, or any war or any conflict, is compromise. I.e., that when you are cold or hungry or in pain or terrified, your humanity itself is compromised. You compromise your behavior. When you're hungry, all you want to do is eat, and you'll do anything. We've seen that many times on the news when people are scrabbling around food aid trucks, pushing people out of the way just to get food. Your entire being is compromised. And that's what this film is about. At the centre of it is a man who is already compromised. He's taken this role as a Sonderkommando. He is helping the Nazis do their job, even though he's one of the people who is victimized. It puts you in that position. Glazer's film never does. Instead, it puts you in a position of superiority. We are sat back like we're in a grandstand watching this bourgeois family. We know the horrors inside, or at least we think we know, because we never see them. And we're just watching these people in judgment. We are never compromised. But in Laszlo Nemes's film, we are compromised all the way through because we are aligned with a man who himself is compromising just because he's trying to survive. But then there's a third element why I like Laszlo Nemes's film. The Sonderkommando himself, he discovers the body of a boy. We know that he's had a son. And he starts to say, this boy is my son. And he's determined to give this boy a proper Jewish burial. And he goes to extraordinary lengths to make this happen. Now, we don't know if the boy is his son or not. Maybe he's kind of going mad. And this becomes a kind of a crazy quest, a kind of quixotic quest that will absolve his guilt and his sense of compromise. So what Laszlo Nemes is doing, he's offsetting one madness, the systemic madness of the Holocaust and the Nazis, with a personal, individual madness. And what that means is that the audience is never stable and secure in themselves. We don't have this sort of simple victim figure who we sympathise with against the horror. Instead, we've got a compromised figure who is battling against a massive world of compromise against him. And that unsettles us. The whole film has a sort of surreal fever dream atmosphere, and that's what I like about it. Throughout the film, we are totally discombobulated. We have to find our own way, morally, physically, emotionally, through this mess. Glazer puts us in a grandstand seat, says sit there and watch these horrible Nazis leading a nice life, which is completely unrealistic and completely unrelated to how they really would have been, while keeping all the horrors safely out of view. It's too glib. You see, let's say we follow Glazer's conceit. If Glazer had decided to make it a sort of surrealist black comedy, it might have worked. But instead what Glazer has decided to do is do it very, very realistically, very, very naturalistic. That compromises the view, because if you're going to do that, then I'm afraid you've got to present realistic characters in those tableaux vivants. If the characters are not realistic, you've blown it. You've made something glib. You're asking your intelligent, mature audience to just to sit there for 2 hours watching this bourgeois family being bourgeois in ridiculous circumstances, and you're asking them to accept it. I don't accept it. Whereas in the Laszlo Nemes film, I'm drawn in. I can't help but accept it. I'm flailing around. I'm not knowing what's happening. I have no area that I could just say, oh, that's right. He's sane. This is correct. I have to find my own way. Do you see the ethical problem there? Laszlo Nemes doesn't allow you to feel ethically correct, you know, and you've got all the truth on your side. No, you have to find it, whereas Glazer is putting you in a nice glib position and not really challenging you. He doesn't challenge you with the reality of the camps, and he doesn't challenge you with any reality of the Nazis because they're not very believable people. Therein lies the problem. You see, what's interesting about this is that the New York Times critic, Manohla Dargis, famously hated Son of Saul, the Laszlo Nemes film. She called it intellectually repellent. She also called it radically dehistoricized. I think that's a very interesting idea, because what she's saying is the fact that it went in so individually on one man's problem, she thought that was wrong. It's taking away all the historical context. But I think that's the genius of the film. We experience it very personally, very individually, right? To be fair to Manohla Dargis, she said about this film, The Zone of Interest, that it was a piece of hollow self-aggrandizement. And I think you can see that I kind of agree with her on that point. But it seems to me that Dargis just doesn't want any films about the Holocaust at all, which I'm sympathetic to. But I think she was wrong to say that the Laszlo Nemes film was intellectually repellent. As a final word on this, Glazer, when he got an Oscar for the film, famously gave a speech. Laszlo Nemes then responded to that film with his own comment that was printed in full in The Guardian. I'm going to leave at the bottom of this, in the comments section, I'll leave a link both to Glazer's speech and to Laszlo Nemes' response. And I'd really like you to listen and read to them all, because I think in the tone of those speeches, you get the whole mentality of those directors in response to the Holocaust, in response to their films about the Holocaust. I think they're very, very telling. I suppose this might be a controversial video. I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with my point of view. I'd love to hear from you. A very interesting film, Zone of Interest, a rare modern film that really made me wake up, sit up and think about things. And I'd love to know what you think of it. Thanks very much.